Success is a group project. Your path to success is the culmination of a bunch of smaller roads that all work together. However, some people have more roads than others. That's the main topic discussed in Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, which we're going to be talking about here on the book club series, all the while I put in some roads here in this town. I'm tired of these disgusting cobblestone blocks throughout my city, so we're going to make actual roads. But before we can get to building our roads or talking about the book, we're going to need to do a little material gathering. The only material we needed to gather is pale moss because I want that in my roads. So we needed to make a moss farm, but that requires slime balls, which I don't have. So I found this slime chunk and dug out some space for slimes, but none spawned. So I was like, well, maybe it's not low enough. So I dug it deeper and added a second layer, but still none spawned. So I just went and found a swamp, built a portal, killed some slimes, then headed back, and boom, we're here. So I'm thinking I'm going to put this pale moss farm over here in the drugstore because there is nothing happening in here. It's completely empty. So I went down here and I dug us open a little spot where we're going to put the mouse farm, and I'm going to build that right now. Look at this baby go. Listen to her pistons purr. What can I say? I'm a bit of a redstone genius. This is totally 100% my design and not a design by Basic Redstone whose tutorial is in the description. Nope, couldn't be that. This is me. I'm Redstone Master. We have so much yummy and delicious and delectable moss. I'm gonna be able to build my road. Let's go! You see, there's another reason we really need to build the roads today, and that's because I plan on building streetlights. And it seems like we're safe today. Oh, nope. There's some monsters out here. I want to release all my villagers into the town. Can't be doing that when I can just have mobs spawn like this. Alright, one last thing before we talk about the book. It's really difficult for me to dig precisely in snow while talking about a book. So with the power of editing, I can go like that, and all the roads are dug out. So all we have to do now is go through and place all of the roads, because I dug them up, which means that we can finally start talking about Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Now, of course, we're going to have to answer the question of what even is an outlier. Essentially, what an outlier is someone that differentiates significantly from the rest of a group. And these can be either positive or negative things. Like, a positive thing could be if you go to a school where everyone's, pretty average, but then there's one kid that is just extremely smart, right? That kid would be an outlier because the kid is so different from the norm of the school. And in a negative context, I'm just going to pull directly from the book. This could be like airplanes are really safe and secure, but then one airline just keeps crashing and crashing and crashing, right? They would be an outlier because they're like significantly different from what is normal. And this definition is basically what Malcolm Gladwell uses in his book, is he's trying to look at the extremely successful and the extremely unsuccessful and try and figure out what's going on. So the book Outliers essentially goes into several stories in the real world, and all of these stories revolve around outliers or just anomalies in general, and it tries to explain why in the world these things are happening. Now, there's like 10 chapters throughout the entire book, and each chapter is sort of a deep dive into a very specific outlier. So what I've done for this video is I've taken these 10 chapters and categorized them into 3 different groups, which I believe are the core arguments that Gladwell is trying to make. And we're going to be talking about all of these different categories throughout the video. And the first one we're going to discuss is the idea that culture shapes who we are. Gladwell brilliantly started the book on a pretty easy to digest chapter. And this first chapter goes into hockey and kind of the culture around hockey in Canada. And it's sort of low stakes, sort of easy to understand, and I think it's a great place to start, so that's why I am starting with it too. So the basic story here is if you take a look at the birthdays of professional hockey players that are from Canada, you'll notice something strange. This thing that you might notice is the fact that the vast majority of hockey players in Canada are born in the first parts of the year, so January, February, and March. So, oh my gosh, no way, zodiacs are real, you have to be a Capricorn or whatever to be good at hockey. That's not the case here. The problem ends up being something in the Canadian hockey culture. Now, here's the thing, alright? Most of these adult hockey stars don't start playing when they're like 14 or 15, right? They've been learning to play hockey since they were a little kid. And the way Canada organizes hockey is that they separate people into leagues, right? All the little kids play with their age groups. And these age groups are determined by year, right? So people born in 2000 would be one league, people born in 2001 would be in a different league. So what you might notice or figure out is that the age cutoff is January 1st. If your kid's born on December 31st, they're going to be in a different league than the kid born in the next day. Now, that's not necessarily the problem, right? Everyone needs a sort of cutoff for sport leagues. However, when your performance is marked against your peers, and let's say you're born December 31st, and your opponent is born on January 1st, well, when you're 8 years old, a year difference in growth is a lot. The kids born in January, February, and March are going to have basically a year of age on you. So they're going to be stronger, they're going to be bigger, and they're just going to be tougher. And although that's not a really big deal here at the start, the problem comes when it becomes time for tournament games, and these coaches have to select specific kids. So these little, like, league agencies, I guess, go and scout the teams, and what do you know, the kids that are a year older than the other kids end up being the better hockey players because, they're bigger and they're a year older. If you're 9 years old, you're going to be stronger than the 8-year-old kid, right? At least on average. So these kids that are born towards the start of the year end up being selected for special training programs because it's shown that they have talent. And these older individuals, because of their extra training, end up becoming actually better than their younger peers, and it kind of just feeds into itself like an endless cycle. So that's sort of the deal with Canadian hockey. However, this isn't exclusive to Canadian hockey either. It seems as though the United States actually does this as well, but with the sport of baseball. Baseball has an age cutoff around like August 1st. That is when the leagues are separated. And if you'll look at professional baseball players, most of them are born in August, September, and October. And this is because baseball follows a similar strategy of separating out talent when everybody is still young and then kind of curating that talent as they age. Meanwhile, other sports like football or basketball, these sports don't have cultures of separating out talent in their youth. So there ends up not being any trend with the birthdays in those sports here in the United States. And I'm pretty sure that the Europeans aren't immune from this either. I'm pretty sure all their soccer stars follow some birthday trend, but it was very briefly mentioned in the book, so I don't remember the specifics on it. So the general conclusion here is basically that Canadian hockey culture prioritizes these older kids while they're in their youth, and that's why a lot of Canadian hockey players are born in January, February, and March. And it's little stories like these that Malcolm Gladwell tries to pick apart and, do deep dives in to try and figure out what's going on. And as I'm editing this, I am realizing that we do not have enough time in the video to talk about every single story that Malcolm Gladwell talks about. So I'm just going to limit it to like 2 stories per category. So we've got like one more thing to talk about on culture, and that is the absurd amount of plane crashes experienced by Korean airlines in the like 1970s, 80s, and 90s. And I know this is an abrupt setting change, but like I just mined a pocket of 12 diamonds, which is already kind of weird, and they were right there. And then there's more diamonds right here. Oh, just one? Okay, well, that wasn't worth the recording. Anyways, Korean Airlines had a big problem with plane crashes in the late 20th century. And if you're thinking like, oh, this is a problem with Korean engineering, it's definitely not, because the Koreans were using the same exact planes as some of the safest airlines during the time. In fact, what the problem was actually because of culture. South Korea and a lot of East Asian countries, there's this culture of respecting your elders, right? Respecting your superiors. And this culture of respecting your elders kind of has this side effect of making it so you don't want to talk back against your elders if you think they're wrong. Unfortunately, this cultural thing is very bad in an airplane, especially when other lives are at stake. The book cites several cases of Korean co-pilots being slapped by their superiors or their pilots, because they talk back to the pilot during flight or something. Like the pilot will straight up just smack the co-pilot, and that's an accepted part of Korean culture and East Asian culture in general. So what Korean Airlines did is they initiated a training program for all of their employees, and the goal of that program was to try and minimize the impact that culture had in the workplace and make it more comfortable for, Korean co-pilots to talk back against their superiors if they think something is wrong. Because what was essentially happening is if the plane's about to crash, the Korean co-pilot would be like, hey, I don't think what you're doing is correct. And then the pilot would be like, no, it's fine. And then they crash. Like, that's what's been recovered from the black boxes inside of planes. So this training program basically tried to minimize the impact that culture has in that area. And lo and behold, Korean Airlines is now one of the safest airlines in the world. But this wouldn't have happened if Korean Airlines didn't accept that that was a problematic aspect of their culture that they needed to change. And now Korean Airlines is pretty gosh darn safe. So now that we've seen how culture can make an impact on how successful or, unsuccessful we are, we can go ahead and take a look at the next segment, which talks about how opportunities can make someone successful or unsuccessful. So the first of these stories that I want to talk about is the story of Bill Joy, who is a famous computer engineer from the 70s up until the modern day. And Bill Joy was lucky enough to attend the University of Michigan in the early 70s. Now, the reason this is lucky is because the University of Michigan was one of 4 universities in the entire country to have a computer. And back in the day, most computers had punch cards, and you had to punch in all the code you wanted to write. And then you'd feed it into a computer, and this computer would then do whatever you punched into the little card. But for Bill Joy at the University of Michigan, he had access to a more modern computer that could do real-time calculations. There was no punch card that he'd have to do. He actually got to sit down at a little computer terminal and fill in his code. Well, by the time Bill Joy got out of college, because he had access to this personal computer, he had way more hours of experience on programming on modern computers. Around the same time as when he's getting out of college is kind of the turn of the computer age, because 1975 is a famous date because that is when the personal computer started first gaining popularity. It then became feasible for everyone to have a computer and everyone to have great access to computing. So Bill Joy had a ton of access to these computers throughout a lot of his life, at least way more than the average person during his time. So when it came time for everyone to start coding, he had far more experience than anyone else. And because he was one of the more experienced people in the field, he then became one of the leading experts in computer science. This story of Bill Joy is 100% not replicable today. It was only because of the time of Bill Joy that story was even possible, that Bill Joy even had the opportunity to succeed, because the market was so new and he had more experience than the average person in the market. Later, Bill Joy would go ahead and rewrite Java, and then also the entire Unix operating system. He went and just rewrote that. But it was a combination of a ton of the opportunities he had growing up. He had access to University of Michigan's computers, which was not something the average person had. And he also grew up in a time where computers were not common, and then grew into a time where computers started becoming really common. Now, of course, Bill Joy was obviously a really smart man, but a lot of his success can be attributed to the opportunities he had and the opportunities he was able to pursue because of them. And this is actually a very similar story to other famous tech people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, who were actually graduating college around the same time. Or I guess Steve Jobs, I don't think graduated college, but you kind of get the idea, right? He's in that age. So that's sort of the deal with opportunities here in the book. I'm going to talk about one more chapter, but look at these roads. It adds so much more character to the town. It's not just pure white with cobblestone laid out. Of course, there's some areas where I'm going to have to touch up still, but I might do that off camera. But the thing we're going to do now is we're going to put in some streetlights. Anyway, the next topic we're going to be talking about revolves around the idea of IQ and class. For this story, Malcolm Gladwell chooses to focus on 2 specific people, and those are Oppenheimer and some guy who's considered the smartest person in the world named Chris Langan. And these are the streetlights we're going to be building. Pretty cool. Now, here's the deal. Oppenheimer comes from a very rich family, and Chris Langan comes from a poor, torn-up household. If you conduct an IQ test between these 2 people, Chris Langan actually is far smarter than Oppenheimer. If you're not familiar with who Oppenheimer is the guy that kind of headlined the Manhattan Project. But the guy also had some odd difficulties, like he poisoned his instructor in college once, and a bunch of other weird stuff like that. But he still ended up being the head of the Manhattan Project during World War II. On the other hand, Chris Langan comes from a very poor family, and throughout his time in college, he had a hard time getting breaks. Like there was one time he just straight up didn't have a car, and he tried to go to his advisor to be like, "Hey, I need a different class. I can't make it at 8 a.m. in the month, like in the frozen, cold Montana winter. I need afternoon classes so I can actually walk to school." And the counselor was like, "Sorry, bud, sucks to be you." And what Malcolm Gladwell sort of talks about is that although Chris Langan might be smart, he lacks a lot of the like cultural or like social qualities that a rich person might have. Because straight up, Oppenheimer is from a rich family, but he also poisoned his instructor, but was able to talk his way into, leading the Manhattan Project. But Chris Langan, all he needed was a different class, but he couldn't make it, and so he lost his scholarships, and he just straight up, basically failed. This is honestly like a really weird chapter. I don't exactly know how to talk about it, but the main focus here is basically that people in, wealthier social classes tend to have better social skills, I guess. And that's because a lot of wealthier families tend to have parents that are more involved with their children's lives. And of course, this is just the general trend. This isn't a catch-all be-all. Anyway, what I think I'm trying to say here is that because Chris Langan's parents weren't involved in his life, when he became an adult and needed a bunch of social skills or just soft skills, his IQ didn't do him any favors. And in addition to just lacking these soft skills, he basically just didn't have, I guess, the culture to be rich. I know that sounds really bad, but the main point is that being part of those social classes gives you a whole range of opportunities in comparison to being, just poor. And that can come in the form of like connections to other people or, just that sort of stuff. And Chris Langan is just an example of many of these stories. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this study that was done, and in the study, this researcher grabbed a bunch of smart students in school, and he called these students his little termites. And these termites were the smartest kids in their class, sort of the gifted and talented kids. And what this researcher did is he followed his termites throughout their childhood lives and then their adult lives. And he also tested these kids' IQs, and they're excessively smart. They're some of the smartest kids you'll ever see. But surprisingly to the researcher, the results were very mixed. These really intelligent, smart students sometimes, picked up jobs that he would consider a failure. Like manual labor, blue collar stuff. These aren't the type of jobs you'd expect these kids to be going into. Instead, you'd be expecting STEM or something. Now, what ended up being the case is if you look at these students and then separate them into social classes, you'll see that all of the students from richer families actually had really successful lives after school. But then most of the kids from poorer families actually had really bad lives, unsuccessful, not making any use of their successful IQs, yada, yada, yada. So the basic conclusion was that it's not really IQ that lands you a successful job. It seems to be more about having the opportunities that you can get from a higher class. Those opportunities will lead you to success. If you just don't have the opportunities to succeed, and you're just in a poorer family and you have to constantly take care of your family, that sort of stuff, you're not going to have many opportunities as someone who's well off and doesn't have to worry about those things. Having a high IQ does actually have some bit of influence, but only up to a point. And Malcolm Gladwell kind of explained this using basketball as an analogy, and he says that height in basketball is pretty similar to IQ. You've got to be at least somewhat tall, but being 2 inches taller than someone else who's really tall isn't going to do much. Then it comes down to your handling of the ball, your movements, your coordination, that sort of stuff. And that's sort of the same deal with IQ. IQ will get you up to a certain point, and you need it to have certain jobs, but you can't rely on that alone. And the opportunities you can gain from a social class are kind of the ball handling or the movement in basketball. So yeah, quite an odd series of stories and chapters. I'm not really sure if I explained those well. The book does a good job. I'm just, I might not be the best explainer. Especially when it comes to more abstract topics like that, I don't really know. All I know is that I did my best trying to explain it. It's kind of complicated. If you're really interested in what I'm talking about, I highly recommend reading the book, because the book actually spends 2 chapters talking about it. So yeah, if you're interested, definitely check out the book and read those chapters yourself. But I believe I am done talking about opportunities, and we're going to start talking about the third hidden road to success, and that is time and effort. And while we talk about time and effort, we're going to be building some power lines because we've done all of the lights. And you might have seen this thing flickering around throughout the video, but this is a little mod that I have called Mini HUD, and it lets you see the light levels of all the blocks. And obviously our streetlights won't be enough to light up everything, so I've gone through every single block off camera, and we've put glow lichen to light up the area. And it was really boring footage, and this looks bad, so I wanted to minimize that in the video. But I just wanted to show you guys what I've been doing here. Also, for some reason, our villagers up here despawned. And I know they despawned because if the zombie guy, and I know they despawned because the zombie's still here. And I spawned 3 new ones in, but if they had been like hurt or something, they would have been zombie villagers and they wouldn't have burned because this is all covered. So I'm honestly not sure what happened to the 3 old ones, but I spawned some new ones in because I genuinely have no clue what could have happened to them. So that's got to be some sort of glitch or something. However, something that isn't a glitch, but is quite unfortunate, is this allay farm that I worked so hard on. All of the allays have despawned, and that's because they all died when these chunks aren't loaded, because I don't turn off the campfire. So that's absolutely fantastic. We love that. But I'm not going to spawn those guys in because that's actually like a real thing. I genuinely don't know what happened with the villagers up there. But yeah, I don't know. That's weird, and I just haven't heard of that before. If I find out that that's actually a vanilla issue, I will happily go up there and kill all the villagers, because then that would actually be like cheating. But I think it's probably some issue with mods or something. I don't know. So that's why I'm perfectly fine respawning them in. I've tried Googling it and nothing pops up, so, you know, we're chilling with that. Anyway, yeah, time and effort. Or I guess mostly just time. If you've ever heard of the idea that you only need 10,000 hours to master a skill, I'm pretty sure that stems from this book. Because throughout this book, that's sort of been the theme. I don't really think I've been mentioning it so far. But throughout the book, Malcolm Gladwell talks about how everything that leads to like a very successful outlier is because these people get like 10,000 hours worth of practice before anyone else does, or instead of anyone else. So if we look back to some of the other examples, like the hockey players in Canada, a lot of the kids that got separated into the separate training programs, well, these kids all got additional training. And if you add that up, it like roughly comes out to like 10,000 hours or something. So that's his like main key to success, is if you want to be successful at something or good at something, you have to have 10,000 hours practicing or doing that thing. If we look at that like software engineering guy from earlier, Bill Joy, he got a ton of time on the, at the University of Michigan, Bill Joy was likely to have like 10,000 hours on the computer before anyone else did. And that's sort of why he was really good at just computer stuff. And there are other stories in the book that kind of focus more on this time aspect of success. And the one I want to talk about is the Knowledge is Power program schools in New York City. So the Knowledge is Power program schools are schools that are set up in some of the poorest neighborhoods in New York. And these like public schools, I think they're public. You gotta like win a lottery ticket to get into them. But these schools take some of the poorest children in New York City and they make them like really intelligent. And the school helps them like get big scholarships and stuff for college or like high school or something. And you might think that there's some like special ingredient to the schooling that these kids are getting. Like they have the best teachers in the world, or, something like that. But the only thing they're really doing is just making their kids go to school longer than the average American. In the United States, a student goes to school on average for 180 days out of the year. But these Knowledge is Power program schools, they make their kids go to school 240 days out of the year. So every year, these kids are getting 60 days more of school than the average American. And this chapter also talks about how destructive summer vacations are for a lot of school children, mostly because wealthier families tend to educate their children over the summer break while poorer families don't do that. Like, poorer families don't have a bunch of books lying around the house in comparison to a wealthier family. So the kids don't read over the summer, and they lose a lot of the skills in those areas. So once summer vacation ends, a lot of the students in wealthier families are coming back with better scores than the poorer kids. But if you measure the progress of these kids throughout the year, it's exactly the same. All of these students progress at the same pace. So basically what these Knowledge is Power program schools are doing is they're limiting the amount of summer breaks that kids take, and they increase the amount of schooling that the kids get. And by doing that, these kids get a lot more time in school, and they end up learning a lot more than the average American. And this isn't only the case with American schools either. If you take a look at some of the best scoring countries internationally for students, and you also look at how long these countries have their kids in school or whatever, what you'll find is a pretty much direct correlation between the amount of time a kid is in school and how well they score on these international standardized tests. A lot of East Asian countries are actually towards the top of this, and if you look, a lot of Japanese or South Korean or Chinese kids go to school for 240 days out of the year. So basically, the conclusion here is that if you want to be successful at something, you got to put in the time. And you got to put in a lot of time, roughly 10,000 hours. And that 10,000 hours number is pulled from some study, but apparently the people that created the study are saying the book gets the conclusions wrong. But I don't know. I kind of agree that if you spend 10,000 hours doing something, you're going to be somewhat good at it. But yeah, in conclusion, if you want to be successful, you gotta have the culture, you gotta have the opportunities, and you gotta have the time. Those three things are a lot more important than any hard work or grit that you can, use to get successful at something. I guess time would be kind of similar to you gotta put in the effort. But, it's not all about hard work. It's mostly just you gotta put in the time. Anyway, that's about all I have to talk about for the book specifically, although I do have some thoughts that I'd like to talk about. I'm going to try and make this segment pretty quick because we're running quite long on today's video. But one thought I had while reading this book is that this guy seems kind of obsessed on the ultra successful, but I feel not a lot of this applies if you're just trying to have a successful, happy life, People define success in very different ways, and I think this one's really focused on monetary success. And then there's also the fact that a lot of the stories in here, he gives anecdotal evidence for, but it's hard to test these things in real life because there's actually so many variables that go into play in someone's life. It might just be correlation, but these things aren't actually causing these things. The things he talks about are just very difficult things to isolate and test. But yeah, overall, the book is filled with a lot of fun stories and cool, little puzzles. It's kind of like the mysteries of the real world. And I really enjoyed reading it. I'm not sure I gained anything from reading this book other than, some quick little, fun facts or cool little theories. But I don't think anything here was actually applicable to my own life. Anyways, if anything I talked about in today's episode interested you, I highly recommend you check out the book. It's pretty easy to read. I think there's one segment that talks about, corporate takeover law, and that one's a little difficult, but for the most part, it's pretty simple. We're just adding the roads to our map here, and these roads look absolutely disgusting. Oh my gosh. Yeah, what in the world is this garbage road, man? And all the glow lichen just out in the open like that? That's really nasty. Anyways, thank you all for watching today's episode of the book club. I'm still trying to make this a weekly series. I know it's been a month since the last episode, but I'm trying, alright? We've got some cool books coming up soon, so if you're interested in seeing what's coming up, be sure to subscribe so so you'll see future content. But yeah, anyway, thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.